if we focus more of our attention on what's emergent and how system shifts can happen more rapidly, I think it liberates more of our creative energy.
Hi, Vicki Robin here, host of What Could Possibly Go Right, a project of the Post-Carbon Institute in which we interview cultural scouts, people who see far and serve the common good. And today's guest definitely does that. Today's guest is Stephen Dinan. He's the founder and CEO of the Shift Network and a member of the Transformational Leadership Council and Evolutionary Leaders. The Shift Network was founded in 2010 and has served over 700,000 people worldwide, featuring over 50 core faculty and 1,000 thought leaders in domains as diverse as spirituality, peace, holistic health, psychology, parenting, enlightened business, shamanism, indigenous wisdom, and sustainability. Stephen is a graduate of Stanford University in human biology and of the California Institute of Integral Studies in East-West psychology. He helped create and directed the Esalen Institute Center for Theory and Research, a think tank of leading scholars, researchers, and teachers to explore human potential frontiers. He is also the author of Sacred America, Sacred World, Fulfilling Our Mission in Service to All, and of Radical Spirit. And now, here's Stephen. Welcome, Stephen Dinan, to What Could Possibly Go Right. And the very question of this podcast can seem like a search for hope in dark times, but it's really more of a search for a systems perspective as we lurch from one crisis or scandal to the next. And our podcast started when the pandemic started, and now you and I are talking as the restrictions are being lifted, considering that the virus is endemic and our tools more robust for preventing and curing the illness. But 2 years ago, when I started, I really did have hopes that the cracks in the worldview of consumerism and exploitation of the earth might provide an opening for, well, better outcomes, a course correction at even this late date. I think you and I are both possibility thinkers, people who believe in a higher consciousness and, let's say, practical miracles, a capacity to pop out of outmoded worldviews and live in a world of love, right? So instead, the pandemic has sobered me about the forces that will not yield power and privilege and allow me my happy stories about a happier landing come to pass. And so what could possibly go right still seems like the right question to actually clear my mind and reveal my own preferences. And my guests have certainly been my certainty disturbers. They have removed my blinders. They've inspired me. They've wised me up. And so I know this pandemic has also challenged your thinking as well. And I am really interested in your answers as we seem to be blinking into the light to our core question, which is, what could possibly go right?
Well, I love that overall setup. And I think that being an optimist with sobriety is a good stance to have in today's world. I remain a long-term optimist, and I actually feel kind of on a more visceral level, a confidence that we are going to make this planetary transition to a truly global species that is peaceful and sustainable on this planet. But I think we're going to push it right up to the edge of precariousness, because humans like drama, and we tend to respond best under duress and under crisis conditions in many ways. So I think that if we focus more of our attention on what's emergent and how system shifts can happen more rapidly, I think it liberates more of our creative energy. And I want to give a couple examples of things that we've been thinking about at Shift and that we're inspired by. So one is the Cool Cities Challenge, which David Gershon had the impulse to create. It was started with Cool Blocks. It's a system for enabling people on a block over block level to reduce their carbon impact and also get more resilient, get more connected as a community. They templated it in Palo Alto and Los Angeles. And I seeded the idea with him to really focus on California because we're so influential to the rest of the world. And so he kept putting foot in front of, one foot in front of the other, and it got it up to the state level. They had a contest for the first 3 cities, $1 million to each city. They got $2 billion of funding backing them. And now the governor's office is fully on board with this. And the first 3 cities are aiming to demonstrate carbon neutrality by 2030, which is a super audacious timeline.
Right.
And sometimes audacious timelines can be pie in the sky, and they can be like, oh, dismissive, or they can be great engines for innovation because they take us out of the box of the possible. And they say, what if we could flip the grid on the electrical grid? What if we could accelerate adoption of electric cars? What about if we solarize all the roofs? What are the incentive systems that we need to get in place, and the grassroots technology to reduce carbon, make those system level shifts? And so by harnessing the spirit of possibility, 2030, and then having the state as a whole start to move towards 2035 from 2045 to accelerate the timelines, recognizing that is more or less the planetary timing that we have to be on. We've got to decarbonize really rapidly. And to start with that spirit of possibility and bring in intelligence about how humans make changes more quickly and have those changes be really something that enhances their lives as well. And so I think what David has done is tremendously valuable as a demonstration. And they're doing the first 3 cities, they're piloting the programs, and then they're aiming to have 25 next year and then 100 the next year. And so it basically starts to snowball, and some of the many billionaires on the planet who have a spare billion or two to put into things and can put some of that to avert the worst of climate change. And so I think that's a little bit on the system side. And I think that if we look over on the regeneration side, there's the increasing recognition of tree planting as an example of reforestation as a real solution that can give us a lot more time. We were just in Mexico for 5 weeks. And the place we were staying, her father is kind of leading reforestation efforts in Michoacan, and is literally has 1 million seedlings, or over 1 million seedlings of plants that they're nurturing at this huge estate, and that they're planting in Michoacan. And that effort then inspires other efforts. We made a commitment to plant 1 million trees via Shift, and we've gotten to about 260,000 of those so far. We did a big online event around that, working with Tree Sisters, which I think is a really great group that pairs women's empowerment work and a sense of reconnecting to nature through planting trees. So if you just look at it at a system level, if you get some of these systemic shifts happening more and more rapidly, so you've got the greening of cities, you've got the adoption of new technologies for or acceleration of solar and electric cars, and those adoption curves are happening pretty fast. Like the number of electric cars, I think, sold doubled last year in China. China is like way ahead of where the U.S. is, something like 15% of the new cars. So they're probably only 3 or 4 years maybe away from having more than 50% of new cars be electric. And so all of these things start to cascade into each other. And if we can create more of a spirit of possibility, that like this decade is showtime for the planet, it really is. It's like we can't delay until like maybe we'll get around to it in 2060. It's like we've got to make some system shifts quickly. And if we can make it more fun, we can make it more engaging. Let's build tree planting into every act of commerce that we do, every and so we created as an example of innovation, we're tuning in with Claire. We said, what if we create a tree positive benefit plan? So not only do you get you get your benefit, you get your health benefits and your retirement benefits, all that, but we also plant as a company 10 trees for every employee every month. And it's not a huge investment, but it starts to be something that other companies can adopt. So that's the change strategy, is not just plant the 10 trees per employee per month for Shift, but to inspire that to other companies to follow suit. So tree positive becomes a business plan or a benefit plan that other companies recognize. And so that's how you start to cascade up to, if we can plant 1 trillion trees effectively, sustainably, working with local leadership in a way that helps to restore ecosystems. I think there's, once we're 6 trillion trees on the planet, we're down to about 3 trillion, and we could bump it back up to 4 trillion. That can give us another decade on climate change efforts. And it also makes much more beautiful. So like the work that's happening with, I don't remember his name, Jose Luis, I think is his name, in Michoacan, that's happening, those kind of efforts are getting supported, amplified all over the world, and so that we see examples of the regreening of our planet in a way that's really holistic and whole. One other area that I think is game changing, that is moving incredibly quickly now, is working with psychedelics. This has kind of been a long underground part of like what helped to fuel a lot of the consciousness shifting of the hippie era, and it sort of was a little bit marginalized for a while, went underground, but now it's really gaining mainstream traction in psychological circles, health insurance companies, the VA hospital, looking at all these things, and so these, the incredibly ancient and powerful technologies for shifting consciousness and doing wide scale change of worldview are going to be increasingly legalized. Oregon's already leading the way on that. There's multiple countries. And so that can also be a tipping point phenomenon 3-4 years out from now, when you're getting really effective systems for initiating people into a deep sense of reverence and care for the planet. And that just, one or two people getting turned on can lead to new organizations, lead to a shift of a whole larger company. So that's another game-changing thing that is going to become, professionalized, becomes more, psychological certification, board certification, and it's happening remarkably fast. There's a lot of venture money pouring into that space. There's a lot of innovation. I've talked to one of our investors in Shift, has been working on lobbying behind the scenes of the Republicans, getting the VA, getting things into the Veterans Administration budget. And I think as we see that come online and the science get more and more solid and more countries start to legalize, that starts to really open the possibility for a more accelerated kind of shifting of consciousness and worldview than we've ever seen historically. And that can help to catalyze these other shifts. Anyway, so those are just three areas that I think are really game changing and innovative and inspiring for me.
Well, I'm uplifted. I really am. It's like what David is doing, David Gershon, I've known him for many, many, many years, his neighborhood organizing, all the way from the Earth Run that he did, with a torch going around the earth. He's a great systems creator and global thinker. And we're actually doing that where I live. On a local level, we have a climate crisis action committee now in our little town, and we are recommending actions for our city. And that actually, it's like the resistance to climate work, just even the narrative that there's a problem, that's, to me, that's a sign, that the walls are coming down. Denial used to be like thick as concrete. And just even 5 years ago, now it's coming down. So
and I think the best thing with the pandemic too is like, in terms of your thing, is like the one thing that I think is going to be the most lasting change is that we're going to disrupt having to work from an office, like that, like location independence, people being able to create really beautiful, green, sustainable environments and then work remotely and have a prosperous life with that's a game-changing thing. So people aren't stuck in big cities and traffic jams and burning a lot of carbon to get there, that it's really going to open up. For us, we're planning to spend a chunk of our year in Mexico now and the United States, and we don't have we let go of our office, and so people have moved to wherever they feel most fed, and that also creates a different level. We live in 30 acres of woods now versus where we were before, and so it creates a different level of connection and immersion in more natural settings that wasn't really as possible just 2 years ago.
Yeah, I hear you. I've been living that life for 50 years. Yeah, so I wonder, there's two things I'm hearing. One is that if you've built a platform, a platform being a mailing list, a point of view, a narrative, like hard work to become a reliable source, that you really do have power, that you're now using the Shift platform not just for producing programs, but producing benefit, producing well-being. You're being able to actually be much more influential. There are people who follow you, people who pay attention to you, and I think that's inspiring. And I presume that there are many people who've built platforms like this who are using their the power of their platform to make a difference. I know I've been quite involved. I'm sort of like a grand old lady, you know, of this FIRE community, the Financial Independence Retire Early community. And there are literally millions of people who are on that path. It's very technical, but, you know, as it's practiced. But I'm recognizing that I too, you know, it's like, how do all of us, and I'm saying this not just as Vicky, but as people listening, that everybody listening to this has in some way a platform, a way, a place to speak from, and the buy-in from a set of people, be it 1,000,000 people or 20 people. And so there's a little bit of opportunity to have the courage to use your platform to promote things and lift things up. So that's one thing I'm noticing. But the other thing, and I'm in agreement with everything you said, is that I'm so aware of the justice component of this, that there are billions of people on the planet who cannot relocate, who cannot go online, who don't have cars, you know. So electric cars isn't that exciting, you know. Do you think about that at all? About there's an aspect to the breakthroughs that we're capable of making at this time that are still participating in leaving a lot of people behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it a little bit more like, you know, it's like the internet as example. I mean, you know, 1997, 98, there was maybe 1% of the world's population on the internet. And now it would probably 70 or 80%. So yes, there are people behind, but it's like as the adoption curve keeps accelerating, it becomes more and more ubiquitous. And hopefully as the technologies are greener and greener, that it's like it's better to have people, you know, right now it's not necessarily a great thing to have everybody in the world have a car. So we sort of, there is a justice component to that. But I kind of see that, you know, that part of where we can also bring that innovative spirit is by empowering more entrepreneurship more globally. So I'll give an example of one organization I really love is kiva.org. It's like, I don't, you know, I have maybe $3,000, I don't know, not even that much money that I have parked there. And then I just recirculated it probably to 100 different developing world entrepreneurs who, you know, I put in 25, 50, $100 to this one or that one. And it just kind of like subtly connects me to different people around the world and what they're up to, and just creating little engines of innovation, little businesses that can then bring more prosperity to their family and their lives. And I think that, you know, we can do that on a bigger scale too. We don't have to just do micro entrepreneurship, but there's a sort of macro entrepreneurship that really is focused more on sustainable development for folks, so that they can create their more innovative version of their future too. And you know, we've done some stuff with wells where, you know, it's like sometimes having a really good well and water system helps to revolutionize life in a village somewhere. There's also, you know, all kinds of things that you can do sort of that don't necessarily take a huge investment, that just kind of start to weave us together. You know, can we give a give back percentage? We're investing in a place in Mexico and looking at a give back percentage to the community for sort of helping them take their school to the next level. So it's just like, if we bring a little bit of attention, it doesn't have to be like at Shift, we decided to allocate 3% of our gross revenues to impact areas just to positively move the needle. So there's always demand to grow a business and salaries and all the expenses that go into producing programs. And it's like, but then we've got our 3% for the larger impact on the planet. And, you know, Salesforce did 1%. There's other companies that have started that 1% for the planet philosophy. We decided we'd be a bit more robust than that. And it's also something that other companies can replicate. So I think if we really think of like how like there's a lot of ripple effects from these smaller interventions and when we scale them up. And that's where it comes back to what you were saying, is that every person is now a broadcaster, an influencer, that you have your circle of people you can influence. And it can be as small as like, I'm going to create a 2-minute video about something that I did that was like really cool in my community, and just share a little bit about that, and then post it on your one of your social media accounts, and encourage people to share that, because then that might touch and inspire somebody else. It's like the more we're getting touched and inspired by other people's innovations, and then replicating that and spreading that on, that's how most of the big systemic challenges we have little solutions that can just simply ripple up to a big enough scale.
Yeah, I really love that vision. And so another thing, I'm just going to throw my, all my concerns at you and see how they get transformed in the spirit of Stephen. Is I just been so flummoxed by the level of polarization and the not just misinformation or disinformation. The fact that everybody has a platform means that it's not all us sweetness and light people have platforms. Right. So there's a lot of people with platforms, and I mean, to be humble, we all have partial truths. It's just that some people's truths look a lot more partial, and so what are you seeing in that space of breakthroughs? Not even breakthroughs. I'm not even want to ask breakthroughs. But what are you noticing about that? It would almost be like the narrative resistance to what you're saying. Yeah. What are you seeing in that?
Well, I think that I've tried to ally myself when I did a book in 2016 before Trump was elected, and I actually went to both the Democratic and Republican National Convention. So I was in the arena when he was nominated, and I'm definitely a more progressive Democrat. And so, I think there's some legitimate things to be worried about in that whole development and the move towards authoritarianism and misinformation. And I also see from the kind of widest angle lens, like my sense has been that Trump is partially here to collapse a certain worldview and pattern. It's like, while he's influential and powerful, it's scary, and it's ultimately going to sort of collapse a certain pattern that was really anti-evolutionary. And by becoming an embodiment of, on a simplistic level, the embodiment of dysfunctional patriarchy, like all aggression all the time, just dominate, all of that, then it sort of like ultimately invalidates that point of view, and it compromises it. And I think that there's a maturation of the Republican Party that's going to have to happen in the aftermath of the collapse. Now, the collapse has been a lot more slow motion than I ever would have imagined, and certain aspects of the pattern have been more tenacious. And I think that's the way that I try to look at that is like, what are the underpinning people and the worldview that need to be honored and validated? So when I wrote my book, I sought out Republicans who I thought were thoughtful to provide critiques, so that I could write about the values of America in a more holistic way than just a kind of progressive way. And I did get some endorsements and partnerships with people on the right. I actually created some events. We created a National Day of Healing and Reconciliation that I partnered with Rich Toffel, who's the founder of Log Cabin Republicans. And so there's a way in which there's a kind of a feeling of dishonoring and disrespect that sort of is part of what has created the eruption or the reaction that manifested as Trumpism, right? And so it's like people feel left behind, they feel dishonored, they feel like progressives and liberals are not respecting them as beings, and they're getting left behind. And then there's an eruption of anger in the form of a, kind of culture warrior who's going to show them who's boss. On a simplistic level, we can go more into the nuances of it. But I think part of the healing is there's a kind of a reweaving, or a kind of, in a way, it's like a revalidation of the intrinsic, divinity and honoring of individuals who might be more rural, who might be more conservative, who might have values that actually, in some ways, are part of the bedrock of American values. And so, if we try to focus our attention less on the warfare on the surface and more of the healing underneath of the kind of the rupture, like the warfare on the surface has created a rupture into like, camps that are basically seeing the other as evil, rather than there's kind of actually a complementarity of value systems left and right. And sometimes if we can be part of resolving that. Like, Joan Blades started working with, forgetting his name, but who was on the right to create this various organizations that are really about bridging divides
Right.
of all sides. And so she was recognizing, having co-founded MoveOn.org, that the dysfunctional polarization was just not really helping. And so that part of this kind of like one-to-one, connection to connection, heart to heart, what are the deeper concerns and values underneath political positions? And that starts to reweave things together. So I kind of see there's this broad arc of an exaggeration of a dysfunctional pattern, in this case, the kind of hyper-masculine authoritarianism, just trying to dominate for the sake of dominance, that I think has really seized the Republican Party, and that's going to collapse in some fashion, and that out of the seedbed of that, then a kind of a more of a complementary version of like political differences can emerge. And so it's a tricky landscape to navigate, but I do think that if we can get beyond the political polarization in our own hearts and minds and understand people in a deeper way, it starts to create a different kind of foundation for related growth. Because, I would say in my 30s, I kind of saw more of the conservatives as the problem in a way that we needed. Like, we could just get rid of them and we could make the country we knew as possible. And now it's a little bit more like, well, how do we fully come to a place of integrating the best of both left and right, and in a way that creates a synthesis and respects some of the wisdom that might be held on both sides. And that it doesn't mean that I'm not a progressive. I mean, I still skew towards being a progressive Democrat, but it's a little bit different spirit of engagement that I personally now am a stand for. And I try to watch myself so that I'm not intrinsically just dehumanizing or denigrating other people just because of their value systems, which is part of what fuels some of the outrage and polarization as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's, as I was saying in the beginning, there's been a lot of revelations in sobriety coming out of the pandemic. And one of the things for me has been, the opening my eyes to how in subtle ways I have been promoting my messages and my vision in such a way that it just really does come across that I think I know better. And to whatever degree, I'm not sure, out there what people think of me, but I could feel it in myself. I could feel like I've got to drop that. I've got to drop I know I have this cool thing over here, and I know, sort of like the vacuum cleaner saleswoman. And so I've had to question that in myself, and it's actually been so beneficial to my capacity to see more clearly, really. So I'm going to throw another one at you, because
Sure.
Everything in the kitchen sink. There's if I squint in one way and look what's happening, I think in a way there's, there's sort of the meta singularity crowd. There is a way in which I think some people are optimistic because it's a view that human intelligence is going to get uploaded into the virtual world. And as that happens, and as more, technological advances happen, the need for complex, confused human beings, the need for humans at a scale that we have is going to be less, and that there are going to be more and more people who really don't have a place in the world that's coming into being in that particular sort of singularity version of hope that I think is out there, whether it's embodied in, Elon Musk or, the guys who are putting on cowboy hats and going into space. So yeah, what do you see about the technological breakthroughs that are actually leaving like living, breathing human beings behind? Do you see anything about that?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely things to be aware of and sometimes concerned about. I think that the counter impulse, the way I looked at it, I wrote an article back in 2000, quite a while ago, just about how we tend to build the next economic age on the foundation of the last. And so it's like, as we move up the actual self-actualization hierarchy, we move information, which is essentially the mental age, right? So it's like we're the people who are the smartest geeks have ended up with the biggest chunk of the pie. And so then there's some concern about that. But I think that what we're moving into is actually a different economic age, which I call the transformation age, where more and more people are in the business of helping growth of companies, growth of individuals, growth of there's the creator economy. A lot of these things are more about the higher expression of our humanity and divinity. It's really about like actualizing higher levels of consciousness, being, creativity, and potential. And so I don't think that economy has limits to it, because there's always different facets of how we can grow and expand and adventure in different ways. And so there, whether 20 years ago, coaching wasn't a profession. There's millions of coaches right now. 30 years ago, yoga teacher, we didn't really study to become a yoga teacher. Now you can be a perfectly viable yoga teacher. And whether you look at massage therapy or you look at, creative skills and trainings like we do online. And, it's like, there's a lot of people who just will invest in things that help them grow and expand their horizons. And that is not going to go away. It's just more and more of our economic value is going to get moved to that. So instead of thinking of like, oh, all these people are getting left behind, which they would if you didn't have another economic sphere to grow into, if all we were doing is systematizing the products of the mind, and therefore a smaller and smaller percentage of humanity was able to create those and benefit from those, and everybody else is left behind, that might be true. But those are the folks who aren't seeing this whole new sphere of economic exchange that's emergent. And maybe it was 1% of the economy 100 years ago, and maybe it's 5% of the economy now. It might be 30% or 40% by the end of the century, that more and more people are doing that. And so the people who win in that economy are those who are more advanced in their ability to catalyze growth than others. And so it's like the teachers, the catalysts, the guides, the coaches, all of those folks. It's an emerging economic sphere, and people are doing very well in that arena. And I think that's a great thing, because it creates a career pathway for folks who have been automated out, if you will, to like, I'm no longer needed to produce the software to run this machine, but I am still needed for my softer skills about how to help people, have greater empathy for each other, and how to have better relationships in their family, and how to, how to live in a way that feels harmonious and whole. So I think of that in those. So just because we the industrial age automated a lot of agriculture, we still have people working in agriculture. It's just a smaller percentage, it's a couple percentage, and the percentage of people working in the information industry will hit some point where it starts to shrink, and the number of people in the transformation industry will keep expanding, I think, well into the future. So that's a little bit my angle on why I'm not overly concerned about it, but sometimes the perspective of people who are like the drivers of the commodification of the infosphere,
Right.
see that, oh, we're just going to leave all these people behind, so we just have to kind of pay them a monthly stipend so that they can just, not cause too much trouble. I think the human spirit is more creative than that, and people will want to contribute in another level through their arts, through their creativity, through their personal development.
Right, the Great Reset. I think I was probably speaking from the point of view of the Great Reset. So there's one other system that I want to throw in here. And this podcast is sponsored by the Post-Carbon Institute, that is, assisting people in developing, both an understanding of and tools for a more resilient future, but facing into the collapses that we're in. They talk about navigating the great unraveling. So, as you say, there's a worldview that's unraveling, and if you focus on the unraveling, you can be pretty darn upset. But there's a whole stream of people who are probably in your networks and mine, who think about deep adaptation, that think about that collapse is inevitable. It's already happening in places in the world that we can't see, but that, you know, systems are collapsing and people are very much in a sort of a preparation mode, not in a, you know, not in a prepper mode, but in, you know, psychological preparation for an unraveling. And so, and that is sort of not really in your narrative. It's you really are seeing all of the sprouting opportunities here. You're not seeing what's closing, you're seeing what's opening. And so I'm sure you've encountered this deep adaptation stream of thought.
Yeah, I find that I don't resonate with it as much as a focus, because I find that it's not as much, it doesn't liberate as much of my creativity. I find that sort of hunkering down in a way, it sort of feels a little bit more like, oh, it's like, I'm more interested in like, let's go for the positive vision of what's emergent, put as much of our attention on that. And then if we have to adapt in different ways, like that's, you know, that's just what we have to do. It's like, go for the moon. And if, you know, it's like, because I think I still deeply believe that we can make a whole system turnaround that doesn't require some of the more extreme deep adaptation views of like what we're going to have to do, like move into kind of remote areas that are, you know, because the seas are going to go up 100 feet and all of that. Like, I don't believe that those are predestined pathways. And I think that what can, the allure, sometimes the zeitgeist of the deep adaptation crowd can start to treat these things, reify them as if these are future facts rather than likely probabilities. You know, they could be even very likely probabilities, but there's always, you know, whether it's 20% or 50% or 2%, there's always a pathway for a much different alternative. And so that's where I want to put my creative attention and focus and draw people into. I think there's other people who are more psychologically, you know, oriented to that. It feels fun and interesting and exciting to focus on deep adaptation. It's just not me. And so I'm not going to make the people wrong who want to focus on that. But I think there's a certain level of preparation that, you know, everybody's going to have to do. We're going to have to, prepare for larger heat waves. We're going to have to prepare for changes in ecosystems. That there are certain things that are baked in that are going to be happening, but I think the worst case scenarios are not baked in. I think that we can turn things around, and whether it's, you know, it's not this isn't so much about wagering. It's about where we put our attention and what's our best contribution. And for me, it's like, it's clear that it's like the breakthrough scenario, the shift to a new possibility for the planet. That's where my creativity, that's where I light up. That's where I get excited. And so that's where I'm going to funnel my energy and focus.
Perfect. We need you. No joke. No joke. I mean, you know, one other real lesson of the pandemic is that there are really multiple perspectives out there, many of which are not in the center of our sights. And all perspectives are really necessary because we're in a time of flux. So who knows? Who knows which way the waves and the water and the wind will go. And so we really need to keep that sort of, it's almost like a spiritual entrepreneurial view of things, that there's always possibilities opening.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, I'll throw out like one, it's like game changing. They go, what if you got all the Fortune 500 CEOs to do like a regimen of deep psychedelic healing work with ayahuasca? It's like, how fast could you change the whole Fortune 500 focus that way? And that's 5-6 years out where that's totally fully legal and above board. It's like, what about if we can get the bishops from the Catholic Church to engage in plant medicine? And that changes. They're like, oh, we got to put Gaia, the healing of Gaia, as the center of our worship now. And it's like, you know, there's always these possibilities. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And so we just have to stay open to it and stay tuned about what's our highest contribution in that. It might be that somebody gets sparked to be like, oh, they end up doing something that's really game changing.
Totally. Any one of us at any time. I love that image. It reminds me of the old days when we used to think about putting acid in the drinking water, but
So this would be more voluntary and hopefully a little bit more
exactly
a little bit more well thought through.
But it's exactly, it's exactly true. Things that were really marginal. I mean, I think this is what I'm hearing from you and what I experienced. Things that were on the margins, ideas, practices that you and I and many people we know carried for many years that were sort of like slotted into alternative. And so they were sort of managed as alternative something. These are now filtering into the mainstream. Yeah. And who knows what will happen from that?
Yeah.
Do not lose faith.
Do not lose faith. And for whatever reason, it's like the deepest places I've gone in myself have the like I feel the deepest trust that we are going to evolve to the next level as a planet. And it'll be messy. It's going to be challenging. There's going to be some breakdowns, I think, but I actually trust that we're going to make it through.
Wonderful. That's a wrap.
Well, it's always a delight to be with you, Vicki, and thank you. I think there's a role for the torchbearers who are 3 or 4 steps ahead of the curve, and you've always been 3 or 4 steps ahead of the curve, and so you inspired the people who are 2 or 3 steps ahead of the curve, and that's gonna keep moving the world forward.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review so that this hopeful message can get out to more people. Check out Post Carbon Institute's Resilience website for show notes and for more guest information. Thanks also to Asher Miller, Amy Burringrud, and Clara Winter of Post Carbon Institute, plus production assistant Michelle Wigg from frugalityandfreedom.com.